So we're going to be covering, in terms of recorded history, 1,000 years before Islam, but in general terms, thousands of years before Islam. So we're going all the way back to the limits of historiography, in fact, so that we can cover as much as we can in terms of the prelude to the actual seerah. So today we're going into prehistoric Arabia, and we're going to begin there because that's where we have to be able to engage on the topic. It is ancient Arabia, so we're not just looking at the 100 years before Islam, we're looking at the farthest potential limits of history. And there is a lot of data there. There's a lot of insight as well for us to cover and review. Ancient Arabia is a wonderful place, honestly. It's a mesmerizing, tremendously rich and mysterious place. It's a place that the Quran tells us about. And if you read into the Quran, it's a month of Quran right now, there are so many ayats and so many stories that bring us back to ancient Arabia. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in appealing to the intellect and reason of the Quraysh, reminds them of the nations before them. And these are nations that they knew about because they're in the peninsula. So Allah calls them to think about and contemplate the perished nations, those who came before. Some of these ayats for us non-Arabs, or those who don't live in the Arabian Peninsula, may be a bit detached from reality, so that we don't actually have a direct correlation to history. We don't know what these ayats are telling us, and we can't pinpoint the kingdoms, the nations, the people that maybe an Arab will be able to identify just by hearing the names. So for example, 𝗃𝙁 is mentioned in the Quran, and these are kings. It's a king and also kings that the Arabs will know of, but the non-Arab may not have really correlated with history. So it's a place that is really tremendously important for us as Muslims, but also as people who love history. Because beyond the Arabian Peninsula, there is less emphasis on this history. And furthermore, we are seeing more and more interest in Arab culture and also Arab history with the recent, you could say, opening of the Hijaz, opening of certain lands. There's more tourism being directed there, and a lot of architectural but also archaeological interest in that region. And so this is becoming a very, very, you could say, interesting field of history that the wider world is now being open to. So we have an advantage that we can have a very deep insight very early on as to many of the recent findings. And what makes this program different is that we're not just looking at the ancient text. We're looking at recent findings in the world of archaeology, in the world of historiography, in the world of even human society, anthropology, linguistics, so that we can actually get the best insight into what Arabia used to be before Islam came. The presentation pack, as you can see, it's an imaginary scenario, it's an imaginary scene, but it represents how Arabia was described. It's currently being described by modern scientists, but also was described in some of this hadith literature, which we'll cover today, inshallah. It was a green place, a lot of foliage, a lot of fauna and flora, great deal of prosperity, water. It was also a place that was very rich in terms of resources because it was a crossroads between different empires and also civilizations. So it was a very rich mercantile environment, especially in southern Arabia. So it will not resemble what we could imagine today when we say Arabia or the Middle East or the desert. It was a completely different environment, a completely different civilization, a completely different terrain to what it eventually became. Yeah, so I'm going to take you back into history today, bi'ithnillahi ta'ala, and we're going to see what that looked like and also what the ancients thought about Arabia, because they were not isolated in that sense. There were neighboring civilizations and empires who wrote about them. And so we want to see through their eye, how does Arabia look like? Who are the Arabs? And what can we learn from them?
If you're enjoying this lecture and would like to learn more about the history of ancient Arabia in all of her glory, then you will love Civilis Arabica. This series of lectures is delivered as part of an annual history program for only £10 a month. In it, you'll be able to uncover 2,000 years of pre-Islamic history through an immersive and unique learning experience delivered exclusively through the official Historion app. As a Patreon member, you may register onto this program by selecting the essential tier available on the membership page for instant access to over 7 complete and unique courses ranging from the history of the Umayyad kingdom through to the rise and fall of the empires of Mali and Abyssinia. You will then be granted access to 7 complete and individual courses. Subscriptions may be cancelled at any time. There are no minimum terms or commitments.
So what is Arabia? What exactly is Arabia? When we think of Arabia from a Western perspective, we oftentimes think of a very vast region. We think of anything from Yemen all the way up and including Palestine and even Syria. It's a very broad definition. The Arab world, Arabia. Some of us may even take it even to East Africa. We're looking at Sudan, the Horn of Africa, Egypt. So Arabia, as we conceive of it today, is a very vast region. Yeah, it covers many regions that in a classical meaning of Arabia was not Arabia. So when we say Arabia or the Arab world, in our modern understanding, this is as a result of a geopolitical definition that's been coined and really, quite frankly, created in the 19th century. So when I say Arabia, I'm talking about the classical Arabia, not the modern Arabia. Now, quite interestingly enough, many nations today that many of us will think are Arab nations or part of Arabia are in fact not part of Arabia. These are actually remnants of previous civilizations who were not Arabs, who became Arabized after the 7th century. I'm going to name a few nations, and I want you just to help me figure out whether or not they're part of the Arab people or Arab nations or not in classical terms. Egypt, but probably an easy one, the easiest one. Egypt, although it's known today as the most populous Arab nation, is in fact not an Arab nation. Although you could say it's been Arabized, it is not an Arab nation. And it wasn't seen as such in the time of the Prophet ﷺ or his companions. Egypt was not part of the Arab lands and was not considered Arabia until after Islam and the Muslims conquered and entered, and it became part of the Arab, you could say, the Islamic empire under the Umayyads and later on the Abbasids. And that's probably an easy one because we know Egypt had many different civilizations before that. If I were to say Palestine, for example, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and these regions towards the north, the Levantine region, that oftentimes confuses people because we think automatically these are Arab nations. These were always Arab nations and were certainly Arab nations in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, Iraq. But the reality is these were not Arab nations, nor were they Arab people, and were not classified as such until very recently. Yeah. So these regions...
Didn't they have Arab tribes in those regions? Like Arab tribes, nomadic?
Yeah, Arab tribes are nomadic by nature. So you'd find them, for example, in the Syrian desert. Up to the Syrian desert, you would find Arab tribes who were nomadic. They would go in there. Even the Quraysh would travel to the Levant. But in terms of those regions being Arab, Bilad al-Arab, as we come to know them today, the land of the Arabs, they were not part of those lands. There were other civilizations, peoples, nations, empires who were settled there and who ruled there. Okay? These entered the realm of Islam and Arabic culture when the Muslims expanded and basically entered those regions after the 7th century. But in absolute terms, when we talk of Arabia, all of these countries are outside of that region. Yeah? So they are not Arabic or Arab countries. although you could say they became Arabized a bit later on. That's important again, because when we talk of history and the history of the Arabs, we have to exclude those countries because they are not part of ancient Arab history. Yeah. From a geopolitical perspective, it's also very important when we talk of the history of certain lands, and we want to take it back to prehistory, back to the time of the Prophet ﷺ, those lands are outside of Arabia. They're outside of the Arab umbrella. They're part of other civilizations and other people. So Arabia is very different to what we think it is. Okay, what we have conceived of Arabia, again, as I said before, I keep repeating, is a modern conception, is a modern perspective, is a modern idea, actually, that was designed by Brits and French, the British and the French, quite interestingly enough, and we'll explain how that came to be a bit later on. So Arab, or the Arab world today, is a post-colonial geopolitical framework. This is what was left behind when the Ottomans were actually vanquished, and the local tribes, especially the Sharifen tribe in Mecca, were working with the British to create a homeland for the Arabs. Okay? So this had begun. They got rid of the Ottomans, and they were promised that they would have their own homeland or territory. So the Arab world evolved, was designed from that project. Prior to that, it did not exist. It was a result of that endeavor to free themselves and to gain sovereignty away from the Ottoman Turks. So the Arab world, as we hear it today all the time on social media and in the news, is a result of that post-colonial, or you could say post-caliphal experience. It's a geopolitical framework, which is why you find Egypt and North Africa, many of those nations in North Africa, are considered part of the Arab world. Would never have been the case in antiquity. That would never have been the case in antiquity. Ancient Arabia, the absolute ancient Arabia, which is the Hijaz, Yemen, and certain parts of the Syrian desert and a bit of Egypt towards the borders, that was ancient Arabia. That was the peninsula of Arabia. The people who lived there were not all Arabs either. Okay, so the people who lived even in those regions, which we consider proper Arabia, not everybody was Arab. Okay? Although there were mostly Arab tribes who came from Yemen and went up north and settled in various places. Not everybody in that region, in classical terms or early times, were Arab people. Okay? So we have to also understand that. At the time when the Ottoman Empire is coming to an end, there was yet another racial tension bubbling up. So you had the Arab underclass in Syria, in Egypt, who wanted to be independent, and in Mecca, from the Turkish overlords. And the issue of race was once again brought up. And in fact, this was the death knell for the Ottoman Empire. The issue of race was brought up. However, this time, rather than being exclusivist, in the same way the Umayyads were elitist, the new Arab nationalists, or the new Arab ideologues, chose another way. They went the other way completely. So rather than being exclusivist, an exclusive club of who can be an Arab, they broadened the criteria. They said, actually, now we want the opposite. Anybody who speaks Arabic is Arab. Anyone who speaks Arabic is Arab. They went the other way. Why do you think they chose that strategy rather than the traditional strategy of being an elite group of people? Does anyone know why they went for the opposite, which is to broaden the criteria for anyone? So if you look, for example, the map here, according to the Arab League and to their Ba'ath, you have East Africa as part of the Arabian world. You have Sudan as part of Arabia. You have the entirety of Egypt and all of these North African regions as part of the Arab world. Why do you think they went for that broad categorization rather than what we have seen so far, a very narrow definition of what an Arab is and what an Arab could be?
Mass appeal and not to exclude anyone.
Wasn't that something that should have been done or could have been done under the Umayyads?
Under the Umayyads, it served the Umayyad administration financially. And I get actually, and just, yeah, okay.
So they went back, they reverted back to the definition given by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Whoever speaks Arabic is an Arab, but not because of religious conviction, because of political convenience. Right? They wanted to create an Arab empire. So the Ottoman Empire was dying, and they had to create an Arab empire to replace it. Now, the Arabs are a minority among the Muslims. We know that. It's even been prophesied. They're a minority. So if you're going to create an empire with a minoritarian group of people, you're not going to survive. An empire requires a vast conglomerate of nations, and so they broaden the criteria. So now just speak Arabic and you're part of the Arab world. So when we speak of the Arab world today, in geopolitical terms, it is the latest episode in a long-lasting debate between Arabs and non-Arabs. We've come to the point now where these regions, which used to be considered Berber regions, right, are now part of the Arab world. Also the Levant, which was actually not, it was Mesopotamia, it was the Assyrians, it was all of these regions here that were not Arab, Chaldeans and all types, are now part of the Arab world. Okay, so as the Ottoman world fell, it was replaced by the Arab world order. Okay, so to increase that real estate, you have to open the doors wider for other people to enter. Okay? So they reverted back, but for the wrong reasons. So now you have the Arab world that looks like this. You have black people at the back, black people in front. Darker Arabs, basically, are part of the Arab world. Then you have white Arabs, part of the Arab world. Right? So it's a broader category now. It involves more people. You have Amazighan, people from North Africa, from Morocco, from Algeria. So it's now a broad club because politically it is more convenient. It bolsters up the membership and makes the empire a lot greater. However, this project was actually initiated by Europeans and by Christian Arabs. The idea that the Arabs were a nation was not known before the 19th, 20th century. It was unknown. In fact, the ayah itself says, يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسِ إِنَّا خَلَقْنَاكُم مِّن ذَكَرٍ وَأُنثَىٰ وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا. We made you nations and tribes. The tafsir makes it very clear. Nations means the non-Arabs, like the Romans, like the Abyssinians, like the Persians. And qaba'il, the tribes, it meant the Arabs because the Arabs had no nation. So Allah said tribes. There was no time in history before Islam where they were united as one nation. It never happened. So Allah said, for you, tribes. So this was a problem because later on when the British wanted to counter the Ottoman influence, they used the Arabs as a vehicle to destabilize the Ottomans. But the Arabs were dispersed people. They were not united people. And it made it difficult for them to counter the Arabs. So they had to create a new Arab world. For that to happen, you have to create an Arab identity, a pan-Arab identity. And that's where we find Ba'athism, Arabism, and these ideologies that took over and really buried the Ottoman Empire. That's where it began. So the likes of Sati al-Husri, the likes of Michel Aflaq, the likes of Gertrude Bell, the likes of Lawrence of Arabia, and King Faisal of Iraq, Ibn Hussein. These are the proponents and architects of this new Arab world. So when you hear in the news Arab world, it's a recent development in history. Never existed before. It's a recent development which served for the anti-Ottoman colonial West to undermine the Ottoman Empire and the Islamic tendency that held everything together by bringing Arabism in an Arab world. Okay? So we have from Gertrude Bell, she was frustrated by this. She said that there is no Arab nation. There's no Arab nation. The Syrians within Syria were closer to the Ottomans than they were to the Bedouins in terms of physical distance. Then she mentioned that the Syrian country has Arabic-speaking people of all races, and they're all fighting each other. Yeah? The only one stopping them is the Sultan in Turkey. So they are, in other words, united and kept from destroying one another because of the Sultan in Turkey, subhanAllah. And she is bemoaning the fact that there is no nation of Arabs. We need a united bloc of Arabs so we can use them against the Ottomans, but they don't exist. And they are all racist, they all speak Arabic. Right? So they didn't see that as a good thing. They wanted to unite them so they can use them against the Arabs, against the Turks. So then William Cleveland says, even the great Arab revolt in reality was not a great Arab revolt. It wasn't about being an Arab. In fact, Sharif Hussein was half Circassian, half European. His mother was a white woman. It was never about being an Arab revolution. It was an Islamic revolution. They wanted an Islamic Arab kingdom. They didn't want an Arab for the sake of Arab kingdom. They were not siding with Christian Arabs, for example. So he says it's not in the name of Arabism that they rose up against the Ottomans. So they never had that desire to break away from the Ummah and to be an Arab world. This came later. So Faisal ibn Hussein, the son of Hussein ibn Ali, this one here, who was first in Syria, later on went to Iraq and became the king, and was the first man, and that was the first Arab country. The Arab nation was Iraq. That's why it was a hotbed of Ba'athism. He says Arabs were Arab before Musa, before Isa, and before Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In fact, Muhammad was an Arab before being a prophet. So what he's trying to say here, and he gave a speech in Aleppo, in Damascus, in Syria, was that the Arabs should not be divided by religion, Christian, Muslim, Jew. No. You should be united based on being an Arab first, not divided based on being Muslim, Christian, Jew. And he reminds them, even the Prophet Muhammad was an Arab first before being a prophet. So Arab identity should supersede religious identity. That's how you break an ummah apart. That's how you divide an ummah. So every Arab, so Sati al-Husri then, so he becomes his education minister. So in Iraq, he has Gertrude Bell, he has Lawrence of Arabia, he also has Minister of Education, Sati al-Husri. So Sati al-Husri, he goes about a massive campaign to Arabize the entire history of Islam, to reinvent history. And he does so by doing this. He says, every Arab-speaking people is an Arab people. So now this includes Sudan, parts of Somalia, the entirety of North Africa, if they speak Arabic. They are all Arabs now. Every individual belongs to one of these Arabic countries, is an Arab. We don't care about the ethnicity. And if this person denies being an Arab, and if he's not proud of being an Arab, so for example, the North African regions and some of the East Africa don't want to be Arabs, he says, even then, we have to look for reasons to convince him he is an Arab. And he goes on and on and on. The reason why we need to convince these people to be Arabs, you're forcing people to be Arabs now, he says, but under no circumstance should we say, as long as he does not wish to be an Arab, and as long as he is disdainful of Arabness, then he's not an Arab. In other words, if he denies it, we shouldn't let him get away with that easily. He is an Arab regardless of his own wishes. So you will be Arab by force. SubhanAllah, the pendulum swung so hard the other way, right? So whether ignorant, indifferent, undutiful, or disloyal, he is an Arab. Although he's an Arab without consciousness and feeling. So this was his idea, his ideology. You are an Arab regardless. If you speak Arabic, if you live in the Arabian Peninsula, you're an Arab. And this was because they needed to enhance the momentum and power of the Arab world that they were creating. So now everybody's an Arab because it helps create this major empire. So what he did was, while the early scholars were battling the Persians and trying to up the ante against the Persians by claiming the Arabs to be superior, Sati al-Husri did something better. He said, actually, no. We won't do that. What we will do is we'll convert them to being Arabs. So now they are all Arabs. So all the Persians who spoke Arabic are all Arabs. Because the Prophet said, if you speak Arabic, you're Arab. So he turned the tables and said, actually, rather than fighting them, they're part of us. They're Arabs as well. So he commissioned for history books to be revised. And that these great heroes who were either, for example, Persians, Al-Khwarizmi, and the likes of such people, or you have people such as Salahuddin Akkad, or Tariq ibn Ziyad Berber, they were converted to Arabs. So in the history books, they were all Arabized. And this was again another way of raising Arab consciousness amongst the new generation, Arab greatness in history. History was now being utilized to create a new reality in the geopolitical sense. So the Arab world was also paved through historical revisionism. And so Sati al-Husri said, let's turn the table around. All of those Persians that we celebrate were actually Arabs because they spoke Arabic and they lived in Baghdad, which was in Arabia. In actual fact, however, the Arabs of the various regions is a wonderful diagram here that shows you the different civilizations that lived in those regions according to the timeline here. If you go to the Levant, Syria, Jordan, Palestine, and even parts of Iraq, which is the Fertile Crescent, these were actually inhabited by ancient people. Before the Arabs came, you had, for example, the Phoenicians, the Philistines, the Canaanites, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Armenians, the Aelites, the Moabites, the Hittites, Persians, the Greco-Roman Parthians, the Armenians, Circassians, Franks, and even British. Because when the French and English and also German Visigothic Crusaders came into the region, into the Middle East, some of them stayed. So you have, for example, Robert of St. Albans, who fought against the Muslims and later became a Muslim and fought under Salahuddin. He married Salahuddin, I think his niece, a relative of Salahuddin, became Muslim, and he fought on behalf of Salahuddin. Okay? So he became an Islamized European. When Napoleon entered Egypt in 1798, some of his commanders became Muslim. So Jacques-François Abdullah, for example, became a Muslim. Salahuddin, Napoleon himself embraced Islam superficially, but some of his commanders really became Muslims, and they stayed in Egypt. Right? So there was a great deal of cultural exchange in those regions, especially in Egypt and the Levant, because the Romans were there, the Greeks were there, the Hellenistic Greeks were there later on, and the French entered afterwards. So there was a great deal of people coming in and out of the Mediterranean and European region and settling there and exchanging. So those regions are now classified as Arab regions because people speak Arabic, number one. So that classifies them as Arab. But number two, because of the political machinations of the Arab world order. So the need to create a counterweight to the Ottoman order was creating a new world. So the new Arab world was a result of that.
If you're enjoying this lecture and would like to learn more about the history of ancient Arabia in all of her glory, then you will love Civilis Arabica. This series of lectures is delivered as part of an annual history program for only £10 a month. In it, you'll be able to uncover 2,000 years of pre-Islamic history through an immersive and unique learning experience delivered exclusively through the official Historion app. As a Patreon member, you may register onto this program by selecting the essential tier available on the membership page for instant access to over 7 complete and unique courses ranging from the history of the Umayyad kingdom through to the rise and fall of the empires of Mali and Abyssinia. You will then be granted access to 7 complete and individual courses. Subscriptions may be cancelled at any time. There are no minimum terms or commitments.